Not from Leicester, not from Kettering, and not from Northampton. Live from Market Harborough, this is 95.1 HFM.
HFM Weather, in association with the new South Leicestershire Learning Innovation Centre. New location, new ways of learning, new experience for you. For more information, telephone free on 0800 731 6723.
Larry Stillman, who's in Melbourne in Australia. Larry, are you there?
Yep, sure am.
A wonderful Aussie accent you've got, Larry.
Who, me?
Well, I don't know whether you can see it, Larry, but I've just loaded up your slide on the screen.
I can see the nice beach there. 12. Yep.
Yep, and that was a picture that I found by searching on the name Monash, which is
pretty wrong of me.
So was that a joke on your part?
No, but that's me. The photo.
Oh, that's a photo of you. But the beach, is that near where you are?
Oh, the beach. No, that's about 80 miles away from Melbourne. It's really nice.
It looks very inviting.
Absolutely.
So what's the weather like in Melbourne today?
Overcast and wet. It's the only day of the year that happens here.
What? Whenever HFM Interactive comes to town, then it becomes wet, does it?
That's right.
So you're not the Manchester of Australia, then?
Some people say so.
So, Larry, tell us about you work at Monash University. Just tell us a bit about your work there.
Yeah, I'll explain. I'm actually employed through the State Library here of Victoria with VicNet, who are the internet service there, and for about the past year I've been at Monash, where I'm helping establish a research centre looking at the social impact of the internet.
Yeah.
And during my time at VicNet, which has been about 5 years, I've spent a lot of time working on issues about accessibility.
Yep, because I remember, I think the first time we ever met was in Barcelona at the Global Community Network.
That's right.
I think you were doing a seminar there. What was that all about?
I did. Oh, it was a long time ago now, but basically I went through some of the major issues I see about how the web is to become more open. I don't think it's well understood, but behind the web page, the HTML that runs a web page, they're actually a set of standards, and it was originally designed so that, say, someone who is blind who was able to use a speech reader.
Yeah.
But what's happened because of lack of knowledge about how to use the code well, and because there's so much software around which makes it seemingly easy to build a web page, a lot of these tools just don't work well with the software that's meant to be used by someone who's blind or disabled in another way.
Yeah.
So what's happened, that instead of the web being an open interactive internet, it's become more closed. So say if you're over 40 like you and I, and the
how dare you insinuate I'm over 40? Don't give my secrets away.
Yeah, but you know, say if you are having a look at a web page and the font's a bit small, and sometimes you try and make it larger and you can't because because it's what's called hard code. And what's happened, it made the code so that you can't change the size of the font. And if the page was built well, you would in fact be able to make the font as large as you want or as small as you want.
Well, I can certainly identify.
Another way.
I can certainly identify with that. If I just happen to go into the office and I've forgotten my glasses, I have great difficulty in reading my email. It's very, very frustrating. So I can identify with that. I believe there's a standard that evaluates websites for readability. What's that all about?
Yeah, sure. Well, there's a couple of different tools. I suppose the ones that everyone looks to are the ones that have been developed through the World Wide Web itself, and you can go to www.w3c.org/WAI, And the accessibility initiative there has developed a whole raft of guidelines, and associated with them a range of online tools to use them. But I emphasise that you really need to understand the guidelines well before you start paying for tools, or else you'll end up with more of a mess of code.
Yeah,
so
yes.
It's not easy. Hello.
Yep. So you're saying it's not easy?
No, it's not easy if you haven't learnt it the right way. And I always say that the web is like, building a web page is like learning a new language. It's got a syntax and a grammar. So it must sound like a schoolmaster there. But I'm thinking especially, see, over the past few years now, I've been engaged with running training courses for developers. And because they're often a bit younger, they've learnt it on the run. They don't like formal learning. They don't have much spare time. It's very hard to get them to recognise they're actually dealing with a language, that there are some rules about if you want to use it well. So what I try to show them, in fact, is by using the code well, it makes it much easier for them in the long run to actually build a website that is much easier to maintain and support.
So there's
a bit of
so there's some benefits in to them, not just to the people reading the websites or looking at the websites. There's actually some benefits to them designing the websites.
Yep, sure. For example, I'll give you an example, right? Instead of having to go in and hard code a lot of changes on a web page, when you've built the page a bit sloppily, if you've used things called style sheets, which are basically a separate set of code where you set the look and feel or style of a web page, all you've got to do on the rest of your website is change the referring hyperlink to that style sheet. So I could change a page, say, that looked blue and pink to yellow and black with green through it.
And that you just make the change on the style sheet, and it
and bingo.
Ripples through the whole the whole show. Yeah,
that's right. And for someone who's blind, it doesn't affect them at all because they still get the text and the words.
Yeah.
Or if you say are developing another version of the page to be downloaded onto a handheld, it'll also work because then you have a style sheet that only works for the handheld. And so on. But unfortunately these things aren't well understood, which is a bit sad actually, because I think there's a lot of wasted time in trying to build fancy websites using code badly rather than using these things called style sheets.
Yes, I think you find that because there's obviously there's a lot of attention being paid to providing tools to people to allow them to develop their own websites, and Mike's example of the Beehive website is probably a good example of that. But as you say, very often when they provide these tools, they're not always designed with people with special needs in mind. Is that right?
That's right, and I've emphasised at a number of meetings with those who are engaged in developing these World Wide Web accessibility standards, it would be a really great idea if there was an online library of effective style sheets that work all the time. In fact, if you look on that W3C website I mentioned, hidden in there are some style sheets, and they're lovely, but they've done nothing to update them for about 4 or 5 years.
No.
And that's because of, I suppose, just time and resources and so on.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, and I don't want to take it much more and lose anyone who's listening, but the style sheets still can't substitute for some of the more fancy things we do with HTML code.
Yeah.
But there are lots of workarounds there. And in somewhere like Australia, which is slightly larger, I believe,
it's a little bit larger than the UK, yes.
If you're thinking of rural and regional users who are way down the fence line and they're going off an old wire and so on, these sorts of websites load really, really fast because
Yeah.
the pages are quite small. All they've got to do is load up the code for the words and the style sheet,
Yeah.
and they don't need to load all the code for each page every time.
So,
So they're more economic.
yeah, so they're more economic. The thought occurs to me maybe that people who designed the web browsers, Microsoft, Netscape, etc., I think they should be perhaps paying a bit more attention to design the browsers to make them much more adaptable. However, web pages are being designed to provide the tools to make them more accessible. That would perhaps help solve it, wouldn't it?
Well, certainly Microsoft's Internet Explorer does a reasonable job, but actually I use most of the time a browser from Norway, which some of you may have heard of, which is Opera Browser, opera.com, which again is smaller, loads fast, and if you can't use a mouse, or if you have RSI or RUS, as they say in New Zealand, it's a wonderful tool because you don't need to use a mouse all the time. And what you find is by doing all sorts of macros, you actually can navigate quite effectively and fast through the web page. But if the code isn't good on a page, it doesn't always work. As you might know, in Australia and elsewhere now, there's a raft of legislation and regulation about these issues, but enforcement is hard and expensive. In Australia, there's been one lawsuit you might have heard of. Someone who's blind took the organisers of the Olympics to court, and he won his case. I don't know if he's received his money from them because the Olympics organisers here were wound up as an organisation. He certainly made the point that anyone really can be, I suppose, made accountable for the web service that they have.
Yeah, I think this is also an issue in the UK. There's all sorts of things happening with the web. A recent example with the Friends United website, which is a great tool for bringing old school chums together, who've lost touch with each other. But recently there was a successful libel case when one of the school teachers took exception to what was being said about him as a teacher, and it cost Friends United something like £2,000. So
well, I think it's a bit like, or it's absolutely like ramps. You remember years ago there was a lot of resistance to having a physical ramp in a building for someone who was in a wheelchair. But in fact, we've found that anyone who's got a baby in a wheelchair, in a pram, or someone who's older, or someone who's legs in a cast or what have you, finds it really, really great, in fact, to have a ramp. And new answers are found, and I think we'll find over time that more and more use will be found for these sorts of websites, which have really good use for special needs, but do actually help everyone in the long run.
Well, that's absolutely right. I mean, it's a bit like the space shuttle syndrome. You get something that's developed for one technology, like Teflon, for example, a coating of the space shuttle, and you find it's got all sorts of applications outside. Okay, Larry, we're moving towards the end of the programme now, and I want to give people a chance to dial in. Are you a football fan by any chance, Larry?
St Kilda Football Club. I don't know any games that play with round balls.
Oh right, so you're one of these weird guys at Australian football with they don't wear proper shirts, so they've got no sleeves on their shirts.
I know.
And they're
posh,
they're a bit violent, aren't they?
Not violent enough.
So you're not going to get caught up in the World Cup fever then?
Oh, I will, absolutely.
You will.
I will.
Yeah.
Who should I go for?
Well, I think England must have a chance as long as Beckham's left foot heals in time for him to be able to.
Left foot. Okay.
Yeah, I can see he's going to be
my right toe.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, it's good of you to join us today, Larry. Stay with us for the rest of